Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Risk with Dr. Naveen Agarwal. Each week, we talk about a topic related to risk management of medical devices in a very casual and informal way. This is not a webinar or lecture. Rather, our goal is to talk about key topics and challenges in a very informal way and share best practices. I'm your host, Naveen Agarwal, and I'm the principal and founder at Achieve, where my personal mission is to help you achieve success in risk management. My guest in this episode is Victor Mencarelli, and we are talking about the importance of effective communication, especially for quality and regulatory professionals in a heavily regulated environment. This becomes even more important in times of change. For example, our industry is going through a massive change right now. FDA has already announced plans to finalize the quality management system regulation, which will become effective in 2 years from now. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the regulatory environment is changing so fast. How do we keep up with all this change and communicate the need for action to senior management, who is generally quite distracted by many other priorities? How do we make our voices heard and actions taken on matters that are of importance to us? In this conversation, Victor offers very simple practical tips. We had this discussion in front of a live audience as part of our weekly LinkedIn live audio series. You're about to hear a recording of our conversation. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Well, hello everyone, and welcome once again to our weekly Let's Talk Risk conversation. I'm so glad to see all of you here. Today we're going to talk about the power of communication and collaboration, especially in our QA/RA world, and how it can help us succeed. And for that, my guest today is Victor Mencarelli. With that, Victor, thank you for joining me today. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Naveen. How are you, sir?
Great, Victor. Thanks for joining me today. Please start by introducing yourself to our audience.
Sure. My name is Vic Mencarelli. I am the Global Director of Regulatory Affairs for Orbion Global here in the U.S., and we're based in New York City. Actually, I'm speaking to you today from North Carolina. We're on a little bit of a family trip down to see family down here. So I told Naveen I would take some time and talk to you guys. Been in the industry for about 30 years now. My entire career has been in the quality and regulatory space in the consumer packaged goods part of the industry. So for the most part, cosmetics, personal care, over-the-counter pharmaceuticals. So, and I'm looking forward to a really nice, simple conversation about a topic that's anything but simple for most people.
Thank you, Victor. And I appreciate you taking a little bit of time away from family on this trip. I hope it's going to be relaxing for you and not stressful at all. So let's talk about communication. And Victor, you told me when we were talking just before we went live that you just came back from a conference where you were on a panel where this topic
Correct.
Also came up. So can you tell a little bit about what this conference was about and what were you guys talking about?
Sure thing. It was part of the American Conference Institute's panel on updating the personal care regulations around the world. And for those of you that are not in this space or that are not really seeing a lot of what's going on in the space, about a year ago, a new law was passed in the United States, a little over a year ago, that literally is a sea change in this space for regulation. So in the past, it was really easy. You made your product, you didn't kill somebody, you kept manufacturing your product.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest problem you had to deal with was class action lawyers. Now, as of the end of 2022, it has become much more like the over-the-counter drug industry at this point, where we're going to be doing registration, product listing, GMPs, adverse event reporting, inspection authority for the agency, mandatory recall authority for the agency. And it's really requiring a lot of additional communication up, down, and outwards on the ladder. So the conference was a lot around how do we get people to the point where they're ready for what needs to be done. So just an example, one of the deadlines is by the end of June, we have to, if you're in this industry, you have to list all of your products with the US FDA that are in the marketplace as of the end of June. So for me, that's about 1,400 lines of data.
Wow. That's a lot. So, in the times of change, this becomes even more important, how to communicate even more effectively, right? And we know our industry is also going through a change in medical devices. FDA is going to, ask us to be compliant with the quality management system regulation in about 2 years from now. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, so much technology. We are in the middle of change. So from that point of view, can you say a little bit more about what are some of the special challenges we might have as QA/RA professionals in communicating, let's say, upwards to senior management?
Sure. I mean, one of the biggest things I've noticed, and I was guilty of it at the beginning part of my regulatory and even my quality career, one of the biggest problems that we have is, as professionals in these areas, we are so versed in the requirements and the needs and the regulations that we get so deep into the woods with management that 30 seconds after you start speaking, they're gone. They can't even think about it anymore. Right? So as an example, I'll give you an example of a situation where literally just in the last few weeks, it's gone very well with a management discussion. I was sitting there when we got all the information about all the products that we had to register and the timing and what have you. And I had said to my boss in a weekly conversation that we have that, we have this rule, we have this requirement, we got to register these 1,400 products. And I'm going to tell you now, I'm going to miss half the meetings that you signed me up for. And his answer to me was, okay, if you don't miss those meetings, what does it mean? I said, we don't sell product in the U.S. Okay, you'll be missing those meetings. Right? It was a simple 35 seconds of a 30-minute conversation I have with him every week. But he understood the impact of what was being asked, why it was being said, and more importantly, if we don't comply, what does that look like?
Yeah.
And he was able to make an instant decision. And he said to me, as soon as we got off the phone, in fact, he actually sent an email to 3 or 4 of the lead members of the senior leadership team saying, don't even bother him. If he gets on your call, great. If he doesn't, don't bother him. Because otherwise we are going to have a big problem.
So looks like this is an example where kind of things went well. Is there an example?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's great, by the way. And first of all, I think it's good to have a manager or a boss who is able to understand what you're saying and relate to it, right? I think I think behind the scenes, I'm also thinking that you have a good relationship, good ongoing relationship, good understanding to be able to have that outcome. Can you think of a scenario, or can you remember a scenario where maybe early on in your career, or you have seen other people in that situation where it really didn't go that well and the stakes were high?
Oh, yeah. I can give you a very interesting example of one. I had in my early part of my career, I had a boss who came into the business, into an established team, and had no experience in the area. Right? So he would always ask us for the details. Okay, that makes sense, right? You don't know exactly what's going on, so what do you need to know? But what would end up happening is he wouldn't understand what was happening because, he wanted the details, so we'd go into the details, he'd mix up the details going to his management.
Mm-hmm.
And now all of a sudden his management is coming back saying, we can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that. You can't stop this. You can't make this happen. And it was an issue where, like one instance that I can think of specifically, we had a label that was completely incorrect. And the product was out in the market. Oh, we can't do anything about that. And we're like, are you kidding me? There's no way you can let that stay out there like that.
I see.
Well, we finally got called into the vice president's office, and the vice president asked us what was going on. When we explained it, because we knew the weeds, the vice president immediately understood the severity and the importance of it, and the decision changed. But it took a week. It took us getting pulled into a meeting with several members of senior leadership and explaining to them how this was wrong. But yet, the person in charge of the group completely messed up the entire discussion.
I see. And you are right. In this particular case, the stakes are pretty high. So sometimes what I'm hearing you say is that things can be difficult when you have to have these multiple layers of communication and levels of communication, and you have to think about how to manage that. So before I start inviting folks for a conversation, because this is going to be more of a general conversation about communication and collaboration, let me ask you this. Is there a way to learn this? Or do you have to be like a great communicator to begin with? How do you prepare your team, for example, in your leadership role now, to be good communicators?
Oh, well, I actually have learned it. And it actually took a rather fun, I'd say 1 day or day and a half workshop that my company actually put in a trainer for, because they wanted to fix some communication issues that they had found in processes. So one of the things that worked out really well for me and one of my jobs was I learned that I am a details person. But I also learned to read what other people's communication needs were, right? A lot of senior leadership, they don't have time for details. They give you 3 bullet points and 30 seconds to get your point across because they don't have time to go into all of that depth. So one of the things I've learned is to read people's communication styles by the way they communicate with me. And if you can start to tangibly think about interactions, you end up with understanding, okay, when I talk to John, I need to give him details because he's not going to understand it if I don't go deep into the woods. And very often that tends to be the team that is reporting in through you. When I talk to Sally, who might be my boss or might be another member of the senior leadership team, who's going to come to me and say, what about this? I need to give that person 3 bullet points. This is no good. This is why. This is the resolution. And that's it.
I see.
If I start talking about all the regulations and this and that, by the time I say the word regulation, the discussion's over.
Yeah.
I've already lost the discussion.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say here, Victor, really, is you have to prepare. You have to plan and prepare how you're going to approach that conversation with another person or in a team. Liberal preparation is required, and knowing what their preferences and needs are is important. Is that right?
Exactly. If you don't know what your listener needs, you can never, I shouldn't say never, you're going to only get it right about 30% of the time.
You'll have a lot of challenges, yes. And, of course, we didn't talk about collaboration, but it seems to me that step number 1 to collaboration is having this type of clear and effective communication in sort of a team environment. So I hope we get to talk to that a little bit more, but I'm going to start opening up the discussion for everyone to participate. And I see, Becky, you're already requesting to speak. And guys, those of you who have been here before, you don't have to wait your turn. Just indicate to me that you want to participate in this conversation. I'll bring you on. And we want to hear from all of you, as many of you as possible. We have a fairly short group today, about your experiences or your challenges or best practices. So with that, Becky, please unmute your mic and share what you have in mind.
Hi, Victor. Hi, Naveen.
Hello. Hi. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? So, Victor, I totally agree with you about knowing the needs of your audience and mirroring the communication styles that they're adopting with you. I think that's really great. And I think it applies not just to verbal communication, but any sort of written communication training sessions. It always goes better if you take the needs of your audience into account. At least in my experience, there's no point in talking to someone like they have 20 years of regulatory experience if they're brand new to the industry. They're not going to understand what you're saying. They're not going to do what you're asking. It's just going to go wrong in all sorts of ways. So I really like that you're emphasizing to understand and mimic the communication style of the person or the people that you're talking to. I'm wondering, so I work primarily with startups and small early stage companies, and often the senior leadership that I have to talk to, like you said, they are busy, they're overwhelmed, they don't necessarily have time for a lot of the details. But what I find in these startup environments is that, yes, they don't have time for the details, but they also don't have the industry experience a lot of the time, because maybe this is their first company that they're starting in this industry, the first time that they've had to really work in a regulated space. So they don't necessarily have any of the background to understand why things are important or why we would want to do certain actions over others. So how do you balance the need to kind of educate and inform and teach them about the industry while respecting that they don't have a lot of time and are not necessarily interested in those details? I'm wondering if you can give some insight on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the delicate balance that you have to ride. You know what I'm saying, Becky? Because you're always working with, you have an in-depth knowledge of X, right? I also always look at it and say, I'm never going to get all of the information across to a senior executive about an issue in one 10-minute conversation, right? So my argument has always been, I am telling you in this instance, this is the issue. This is why it's an issue. This is the proposed resolution. And allowing the executive then to ask the first follow-up question. Because a lot of times that'll kind of point you to, where is that executive's mindset coming from? And then you can spend the next 5 minutes or 8 minutes of your time with them sort of shelling out what they're asking about. Because what you're doing at the same time is you're putting more questions into their mind. And now what have you created? You've created a request for training.
Interesting. So this is, in some ways, and we have to think ahead and say, how are we going to prioritize? How are we going to bring up the main point that we want to discuss? So that's the pre-work. And this is where I personally see a link to sort of risk. Like, how are you going to bring up the points that you think require the most attention? How do you...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Naveen. I mean, if you think about it from a risk management perspective, right? And everybody loves, especially in senior leadership, all right? Every senior leader I have ever worked with, and I've been at 5 different companies, ranging from essentially a startup all the way through to the largest chemical company in the world to one of the largest CPG players in the world. Every senior executive I've ever spoken to, so if you have the letters VP after your name, every one of them has loved to use the term risk management. 90% of them do not understand the concept of risk management. It is risk avoidance in their heads.
Okay.
So if you can start to kind of talk to people with an understanding of what's in their mind already, you all of a sudden become able to have a more fruitful discussion about what needs to happen.
Got you.
To be in a good place, what needs to happen. You don't have to be in the perfect place.
Got you. That's interesting. Great, guys. So as you can see, this is a topic which I'm sure you have come across in your experience too, and would love to hear from you as well. Where are some of the places that you have struggled yourself in communicating, either laterally or to your superiors or within your team or outside partners? What are some of the challenges you have faced, and what has worked for you? Would love to hear that from you as well as part of this conversation. So let's continue that conversation, Victor. We briefly touched upon risks, right? So before we start these conversations, we have to have a good understanding of what are we trying to bring up for a discussion and why it matters, and there's a risk angle to it. So is there a way to go about doing that? Or is it just sort of in our mind, we just do casually, hey, this is what most people are complaining about, so that's what we should talk. Do you have any suggestions on how we go about doing that actually thought exercise?
Yeah, and I think that the first step in that exercise is going to go back to what we were just talking about a second ago with the idea of knowing who you're going to speak with, right? Trying to anticipate the type of questions, the type of things that you're going to have to discuss. So you know the risk, right? You identified risk A. You've come up with mitigation options B, C, D, and E. Knowing your company's risk tolerance, knowing your management's risk tolerance, and knowing your management's preference of how to understand what you're saying is the first piece of that whole thought exercise.
Got
right?
you.
Because risk A may have mitigation B, which essentially eliminates the risk. If that's where your risk tolerance is, great. That's what you do. Or that's what you start to talk to.
And this is the pre-work we are talking about, right? And sometimes we may have to actually get some help. Maybe talk to people who know that person a little bit better than we do, and maybe do some role playing, maybe do some practicing before. So Victor, actually in the remaining time, we want to switch gears a little bit, because mostly we have talked about verbal communication or in a meeting. Communication is not limited to just that. We also have to do a lot of written communication, emails. So can you share some, challenges or best practices when communicating by email, especially with senior executives? I think that could be an interesting topic to talk about.
Oh, absolutely. And I can kind of give you some kind of a funny story about something that happened to me when I was a little bit younger in my career.
Sure.
When I first got into a manager's role, right, where I started to really communicate with senior leadership on a more regular basis, like I said earlier, I'm a details guy, right? I wrote an email that I think if you printed it out would have been about the size of the novel War and Peace. With all of the details in depth in the woods. I will never forget the next thing that happened. I hit send. And this particular senior leader was actually in his email at the time. So we saw it pop up and it had a little exclamation point, urgent.
Okay.
He opens the email. He sees just the length of it. He didn't even read a word of it. He sees the length of it. He picks up the phone. He calls me to his office and he says, if you ever write me an email that's more than 5 lines long again, you're fired.
Okay.
Okay. So big mistake not understanding my audience.
Yeah.
But a couple of things I've found that actually help there. One, real subject line. If this is urgent, mark it urgent. If this is a resolution, mark it resolution. If it's a question, mark it question. So that this way, the recipient immediately has an idea of what the context of the issue is. Also use a subject line that actually tells them something about the issue.
Yeah.
Then the second thing is, I've kind of taken to the reverse email methodology. And that's basically, you put your request or your recommendation as the first or second sentence of the email.
Got you.
And then if you need to give details or you need to tell somebody a little bit more deep information, you put that under it.
Okay.
If you've got a mixed email group where you have some people that need the details, you got some senior executives who can't deal with the details, and you got some folks in the email that just won't understand the details because they don't do it routinely.
Yeah.
You've now given them the key information in that first couple of sentences. And if they want to read the rest,
They can.
they do. If they don't, they can respond right away within those first couple of sentences, and you're done.
Yeah. So, Victor, you shared the mistake you made. I'll tell you the mistakes I have made is not paying attention to the fact that there are 20 other people on that email and hitting the reply all button. Never ever do that. And
I deal with my team all the time for that.
Yes. And one of the tricks that I learned was to not automatically send your email right away and use a setting that actually holds it in your outbox for a certain time. And you have to go there manually. So sometimes, we are maybe emotionally upset and we want to write something that we may regret later on. It's a good technique to just not, as a blanket setting, send your email right away. When you hit the send button, don't let it go automatically out. Let it sit in your outbox so that you have a chance to go look at it. Maybe fix the typos, maybe fix the, think about it from the recipient point of view. So that worked for me. I thought that'll be interesting for people to know. So guys, we are coming to the end of our 30 minutes. This has been a fascinating conversation for me, Victor, because I think we touched upon some real practical tips, right? So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to just think about some of the key takeaways you want to share with our audience today. But I'll share a few announcements with folks. First of all, on this topic, guys, there's a book I'm going to recommend to all of you, and I want to drop the link in the events page here. This book just came out by a guy named Charles Duhigg. He wrote the book about the power of habit, and he has written a book called Super Communicators. I strongly recommend that you get a copy of that book and read it. This is going to help you tremendously. Many of the things that Victor has discussed in this conversation with us today, you will see why that matters and why it is important. So I'll drop a link to that. Secondly, you know that the recordings of these conversations are going to be available, but mark your calendars for 11 a.m. Eastern on Fridays, because that's when we meet. Reach out to me anytime if you have a topic of interest that you want to talk about or hear more about. The more feedback I get from you, the better it will be for all of us, because this conversation is for us. It's not about me or the guest that we are having, but we are trying to facilitate a discussion that will be of value to all of us. So the more feedback you give me, the better it is. Find a way to connect with me. I'm on LinkedIn all the time. Send me a message or a comment or an email, whatever comes to your mind. So I hope you will continue to participate and stay engaged in these conversations, because that's what it's all about. So Victor, with that, I want to invite you to share just maybe 2 or 3 key takeaway points for this conversation today.
Sure. Thanks, Naveen. And to the folks listening, please feel free to connect with me. Like Naveen, I'm on LinkedIn. Easy to find and pretty reasonable to speak with usually. But if I boil it all down, I kind of come up with 3 bullet points. Mm-hmm. Know your audience, prepare your topic, and respect your listener or your reader. Right? If you can do those three things, you are going to improve your ability to interact and your ability to actively and viably communicate what needs to be communicated and have it understood, accepted, well, maybe not accepted, understood, recognized, and actioned upon.
Perfect. Because it's the action we are looking for. We are looking for the result. We are not looking to muddy the waters, but we are looking for the result. So the more effective you are in communicating and achieving those results, the more success we will have in our careers. I think that's where it all connects to everything. So guys, fantastic. Thank you, Victor, for sharing these conversations. Thank you, Becky, for being part of this conversation and sharing your thoughts and questions. And thank you, everybody in the audience today for joining. Keep an eye on the announcement for next week. It has already gone out on LinkedIn. In fact, I'm going to be having a very interesting guest next week. He has done over 100 podcasts in the last 2 years, talking to a lot of QA/RA leaders. And I think we can learn a lot of lessons from that experience. So show up next time. We will see you next Friday at 11 once again. Thank you and take care. Bye-bye.